The pest of my banker is my friend. And here's one fine example, Kristen Christian. You know that's a play on a very old saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And it came to mind when I began to do my background research for our interview today with a very powerful and lovely lady, Kristen Christian. To avoid confusion, let me spell it out, Kristen, and of course Christian as you would normally spell it. We find her today by way of Skype at her home in the Los Angeles area, but let me set the stage a bit more before we spend some time with her. In October of 2011, this lady spawned one of the largest consumer migrations in American banking history. When on her Facebook page, being vexed by how she was being treated by her bank, which is the infamous Bank of America, she offered a simple solution to other bank customers. If they were as unhappy with the service that they were being given and the nickel and dime charges that were showing up on their statements, take your money to either a friendlier bank or, better yet, to the local credit union. And thus was born Bank Transfer Day. And thus, on November 5th, 2011, did 700,000 consumers shift their banking business from nonprofit institutions to non-for-profit credit unions. Oh yeah, in the months since, we've added an additional 5 million Americans, along with $4.5 billion in deposits. Well, you can't say nicer things about a person than that. So, Kristen, welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure, truly. Now, I think it's important that you let our listeners know a bit more about what led you to create this Facebook page that started all this. So what was the motivation?
Well, I'd been a Bank of America customer for 15 years, but when the new policy requiring only customers with less than $20,000 in combined accounts to pay a $5 monthly fee for debit card access was announced, I recalled the words of Edmund Burke. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. After researching my options, I decided to join a credit union and created a Facebook event page to encourage my immediate social circle to do the same. So I invited 500 friends and was absolutely stunned that 10,000 Americans RSVP'd to the event within the first 3 days alone. And from there, we saw an incredible shift in the way Americans bank.
Well, I find something very interesting. First of all, you create a page, and then you invite 500 friends. Now, it appears to me that you had a certain skill set before you even inadvertently created a campaign. So what did you bring to the table?
I think being a digital native, it's naturally the way we reach out to one another. It doesn't make much sense, I suppose, to send 500 emails and then respond to 500 responses with loads of questions. It's much more simple to put together a page that has all of the information a person is looking for and be able to publicly post responses to any questions people might have.
Well, I'm a fan of social media myself, and I located your Facebook page and was properly impressed by the number of people that friended it. So obviously that didn't happen from day one. What was it a tidal wave or was it a trickle? How did that begin?
It definitely began as a tidal wave that there were 10,000 attending in the first 3 days, as I mentioned. And I woke up on that third morning at, I believe, 5 or 6 in the morning to a phone call from Jen Dahl, a reporter for the Village Voice. And I remember stuttering to ask her to repeat which news organization she was calling with. And even when she'd repeated herself, I thought, why would the Village Voice want to talk to me? And I had absolutely no idea at that point how big this movement was going to become. And in fact, that it would go from being a Facebook event to an actual social movement. And from there, it was just an absolute whirlwind of interviews with so many news personalities that I grew up watching as a child, Dan Rather and Diane Sawyer. And being able to share this message with so many people, it was absolutely incredible, and it all happened so very quickly.
Well, so would you say that prior to that you were an activist, or how would you describe yourself?
I would describe myself as an active American patriot, that I stand by that which I believe. And if I don't believe in the way a company is doing business, I won't support them. Now, that is the fundamental core of capitalism, that a business has a right to choose which practices to put into place within the law, of course. But more important than that, consumers have a duty to support these businesses whose values echo their own. And I was very sad to see that over the course of the last few decades, there had become a sense of complacency among consumers, and we were just blindly supporting businesses without verifying if those businesses represented us. And on a very local level, I see people supporting farmers markets, I see them supporting independent grocers, but on a much bigger level, people were supporting these banks that they were then, complaining about over and over and over. They were very unhappy. And the answer was right in front of them, that if you don't like the way a business is treating you, look for another option. And when it comes to financial matters, credit unions are the best options for consumers who want to invest in their communities.
Well, it's another play on the saying, people vote with their feet. And when those feet start heading in a different direction, it's pretty good feedback to the offending company, the offending bankers in these cases. And I find it somewhat amazing, and yet not, that what you're doing came out at about the same time as the Occupy movement. And Occupy itself had its complaints about banks, and Occupy itself was encouraging people to stop dealing with banksters. You simply provided a very physical and practical way to do that.
Absolutely. I feel, though, that we must be the change in the world we wish to see. That I heard a lot of complaints from Occupy about capitalism and supporting banks, but then at the same time, we saw an interesting thing in Oakland, actually, that Occupy Wall Street was, Occupy Oakland rather, was complaining about the way banks operate and even going out and vandalizing the buildings of these banks. But then the very next day, after this bank was vandalized, now this was a Wells Fargo branch, the very next day, Occupy Oakland opened a savings account at that exact same branch.
That is called cognitive dissonance.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'll tell you what. There are several important lessons I think our listener can take away from our conversation, those listeners who are activist-minded, that is, that if you can find your passion in making a difference, you can also find a career. It's sort of a play on the Occupy mantra, which is, I lost my job, but I found an occupation. In your case, you didn't lose a job, but you did find an occupation. So was that true for you in some fashion?
Well, I did actually. I was forced to close my gallery, not only from how busy I was coordinating the bank transfer day efforts, but actually from the threats from Occupy Los Angeles that were deemed very credible by the LAPD and members of the FBI, that there were some very angry people. And so I did have to close my gallery. But it's been very bittersweet, actually, because I've been able to cultivate a career in helping cooperatives reach the next generation of members through effective social media strategy. And
if I can play on that, Kristen, there's more than enough common ground between you and the Occupy movement. And I know that both you and Occupy sprang forth within weeks of each other, and both are going strong. And the fact that you had initial great support from occupiers across the country, especially here in New York City, the fact that one or two people get crossways with this because they're more interested in ideology than in being effective in making change. I have two reasons for bringing this up. First is a cautionary tale for any activist. Don't become a detractor of a sister movement over differences. In this case, your support of nonprofit credit unions as opposed to be adamantly anti-bank. And secondly, to let you know that a predominant number of occupiers do appreciate you roasting of the big banks, and so thank you. So going on the second year for both you and Occupy, what do you see in the Occupy movement today that deserves support?
I definitely see so many people in the Occupy movement who understand and value the same approach that I do, in that there's not much sense in sitting around complaining about something when you could be using that time to formulate a strategy to overcome it and getting up and taking action. Actions do speak louder than words. And I've seen in New York, Occupy Sandy, which has just been an incredible help, where fractions of our government have failed in stepping in to help these homeowners reclaim their lives. I've seen the values put into practice by members of Occupy Sandy, and I think that deserves an incredible amount of gratitude, applause, and support.
Well, to me, this brings up the question of what is the most effective form of, quote, protest, unquote, or whatever we call it, when people want to cure what ails us? Or is there only one right way?
Well, I think to use our own physical health as a metaphor, there is no one cure-all for any disease, and I see problems as a disease. So taking the same standard approach to every problem really isn't going to be effective. Now, that said, you might find that the same approach will work for multiple problems, but it won't necessarily work for every single problem. Take Martin Luther King, for example, that the core problem was a section of the public was being kept out of a certain space. That's unfair. So the response to that made sense to occupy, if you will, that space in retaliation and in protest of this unfair law. Now, at the same time, a public space, you're not kept out of it. And so I think in combination with the blessing that we have of social media, we no longer have to gather in person or litter flyers, physically litter flyers all over the city in order to share a message. In fact, posting, one Facebook post can reach as many people as a billboard on the side of the freeway might reach. So I think for modern activism, social media and the internet will play a very strong role in accomplishing what we'd like to.
Well, then that leads to my next question, which is, everybody hates being abused by banks. You created a way to be able to physically and financially show displeasure. Has this been attempted in other countries?
Absolutely. There have been half a dozen similar movements across the globe. I think my personal favorite is Skift Bank Dog. They're based in Copenhagen, Denmark. And I was very honored and pleased to meet the fine young men and women behind this sister movement and to hear of their rousing success in challenging the banks that are driving Denmark into the ground. And they've been very successful. And I do believe that other approaches taken similarly across the globe would be met with similar success.
Well, given the fact that we have 15 minutes of fact, and frankly with you we could go on for 15 hours, let me pose one last question to you. I noticed on your Facebook page the quote that you posted from Gandhi, quote, "Action expresses priorities." How would you like to give us a few parting words within that context?
I think that every decision we make has an impact, and whether or not we choose to take action in itself has an impact. So in your daily lives, I would encourage people to show what's in their heart through their actions. Show what is important to them. If you believe in your community, make smart choices every single day. Don't shop with companies that you disapprove of. Don't support businesses that you feel are driving your community into the ground. Even as far as past consumerism, that, if you feel your city is unfriendly, smile at strangers on the street. If your bank teller is grumpy with you, smile. Tell her you love her blouse.
You realize, of course, if we did that in New York, we'd be arrested. Just kidding, of course. Well, you're right. A smile along with action can make a lot of difference, especially if there's action that comes along with it. So, Kristen, I want to thank you on behalf of our 15 Minutes of Fact listeners and fans for sharing your story with us. Inspirational. I want our listeners out there to know that they can find you by way of your website, which is Kristen Christian, that's Kristen again with a K.com, on Tumblr as Kristen Christian, and on Twitter as @the Ms. Christian. So, this is Jerry Ashton of 50 Minutes of Fact here on WGRNradio.com, thanking Kristen for her time as well as the attention that you folks have given us by stopping by to learn more about social change movements and the wonderful people involved.